what's up? My name's Samuel Leeds. I'm sat here with Hakeem. Hakeem is the elected officer in London of the Labour Party. You saw my video?
I did.
The video was about rent control, and Hakeem messaged in the chat and said, can I come and have a debate with you about rent control? So here we are in my home office. So Hakeem, what made you want to come and talk about rent control with me?
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity of coming, Samuel. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you for the opportunity that you've given myself and other Academy members being able to learn about property education, these things that aren't taught in schools but that should be. And look, before I got into property or before I got into business, I was first interested in politics. And the reason I'm interested in politics is because I grew up in inner city London on a council estate, and I saw the challenges that come with in those estates, and I went to an inner city London school until I was about 13, 14 years old, and luckily, or not luckily, I'm grateful that I was able to have that opportunity and learn what it's like to live in London, in that area, in those sorts of areas. And then when I was 13, 14 years old, my mum moved me to a countryside area in Huntingdon in Cambridgeshire, and it was in that area, in a school that I went to there. It was seeing the differences in terms of the life chances and the life chances and opportunities between an inner city London school from a sort of low income area to a more middle class, or so to speak, and a more affluent area. That's what got me interested in politics in the first place. Right. That's why I studied at A level and then at university, and it was really I really wanted to understand. Well, firstly, why the UK. I feel that the UK is such an unequal society.
Yeah.
I really wanted to understand the reasons why and what I could do about it. So that's the reason why I then studied European history, government and politics.
Great.
English literature, etc., and then went on to university to do politics, and then I ended up choosing the Labour Party as the party that I feel that reflected my values around not having. I don't believe in monopolies. I believe in having a diversified market. I believe in offering opportunity to small and medium enterprise. I like Tesco's like everybody else, but I prefer to see more corner shops and butchers and bakers that are owned and run
small
by
businesses.
Small businesses,
yeah, great.
And small families just like yours and mine and Russell's, yeah. As opposed to having big, large corporates sort of owning everything.
Yeah, I understand.
And really concentrating all of the wealth in the hands of the sort of small few.
Yeah.
So the reason why I back Sadiq as a candidate is because Sadiq, for me, shares those values. The reason why I chose to become a member of the Labour Party, and the reason why I'm active in the party is because our party shares those values. And I also agree in this case also on Sadiq's policy on rent controls, and that's the reason why I came here today. And that's just a bit of background about me.
Yeah,
and
that's
story.
great. Well, firstly, I just want to say, respect for coming on the show. And I love debates. I love being challenged. I'm open-minded. I think rent control is a bad idea. However, I'd love to hear why you think it's a good idea, and we can thrash it out.
Sure. So, firstly, I think a few key facts. So, did you know that, for example, the average private rented home or one bed in London is costs more than a 3-bed nationally in England? So that to me is quite a shocking statistic. I know that a 1-bedroom flat in London to rent would be somewhere around £1,100, sometimes as great as £1,400.
Yeah.
If it's a 2-bedroom flat, we're talking about £1,400 right up into about £1,800, and then a 3-bed flat anywhere between £1,800 and £500, and that tends to price out most Londoners that come from, have any sort of low income family, or even medium income earners can't afford to rent in London. We've already been priced out of the owning market as well, and that's the reason why I back Sadiq's policy, and that's the reason why I believe in it. And it just goes to show as well that actually up to 1 in 4 Londoners live in the private rented sector. So that's 25% of the population of London. That's 8.4 million people. And then on top of that, most of us, if not all of us, apart from a relatively small sort of percentage of people, can actually afford to live and rent in London. And that's the reason why I think it's the right policy.
Okay, so I understand that London's expensive. I totally get that. But so do you think rent control would bring down the rents? Because that's not what it's done. If you look at places like New York and California, when you bring in rent control, although it caps it, what happens is you end up with a shortage of houses, right?
So I appreciate that view, and to some extent, I do think you're right. But I don't think it's a simple policy of rental control or non-rental control. I think it's actually about how the policy is really implemented. Yeah. So in this case, the mayor, Sadiq Khan, he's not asking the government permission to implement rental controls. What he's actually asking for is for the office of the mayor to have the powers to create a private rental commission. Now, what this really means is, well, firstly, starting from sort of top when we talk about politics, my first politics tutor and lecturer at A level, he always used to say that politics is the art of compromise, and politics is the art of the possible, and a good political decision leaves no one happy but everyone okay. And what we really mean by this, and I really agree with that statement, and it really sort of rings home with me. Yeah. And what we really mean by this is that in something we call real politic, it's really about balancing interests, employers versus employees, consumers versus producers, and landlords and tenants. Yeah. Problem is that, depending on your perspective, we all believe that we worked hard for our money, or we worked hard to build our businesses, or or within that job for that employer. But when it then comes to deciding how you want to organize society and who should pay this tax or that tax, or more tax or less tax, everyone from their own perspective always believes that they should pay less, or that they're entitled to more. Yeah. So from that perspective, then, as I believe that it's politicians, especially from a Labour perspective, it's their responsibility. And I'm an officer, not a politician, but as the ethnic minority forum secretary within the London Labour Party, it's my responsibility to make sure that all the interests are balanced. Yeah. So it shouldn't be that landlords overpower tenants, or tenants overpower landlords. It should be balanced. They need to make sure that everyone gets equal opportunity, and the opportunity to own, the opportunity to be able to pay decent and have decent and proper housing. And I know that these are values that you and I share. Yeah. And that, in most cases, landlords, or in our case, where we have proper property education and we have the right values when it comes to bring in decent housing with good fire safety regulations and things, we implement those values, but unfortunately not everybody does, and as a result, bad landlords can give good landlords a bad name, and also some tenants are just and just for context, I'm a tenant right now as well myself.
And I'm a tenant.
Right.
And thank God that rent control isn't a thing in my area.
Why?
Because I want to pay a really high rent. In fact, I have a problem that I can't find enough nice houses, expensive houses to rent. because there's not many out there. So I mean, if rent control came, even as a tenant, from my perspective, how I see it, I respect your opinion, but from a tenant's perspective, from a developer's perspective, from a investor's perspective, from every which way you look at it, the effects of rent control over time are bad for everybody. The only people that rent control, the only person that wins with rent control are the politicians, because they look like they're trying to do a great thing. Like Sadiq, for instance, saying he wants to bring in rent control. Everybody, I think he's saying that because he wants to get votes. I think he's saying that because people are like, yay! But actually, it's devastated everywhere it's touched. I can't see that it doesn't make any logical sense. So I'm very open to being, proved wrong. But I mean, can you name one place, one city where rent control has actually brought out positive effects? Because I can't. I've looked at all the different effects and statistics of what's happened. It's always been bad.
Would it be okay if I answered that first, starting with what you first said
Yep.
about depending on the perspective? So you mentioned you make a good point there, and I appreciate where you're coming from. But you said a tenant, a developer, or an investor.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of when we're talking about 8.4 million people that live in London, a lot of people are tenants.
Yeah.
Not everybody's a developer, and definitely not everybody's an investor. So in terms of Sadiq's job and our job as the Labour Party to represent all the interests and balance out policy making to make sure that as many people as possible are served in the best way.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, then developers and investors who, well, firstly, there are different typologies of developers and investors. So good developers and good investors like yourself will have great values and will implement them, and we want more people like you to be in the private rented market. However, other types of developers and investors who maybe don't care, who don't care about fire safety standards, who don't care about tenant living conditions, who don't care about deliberately manipulating the market to price out most average Londoners or most Londoners from being able to rent a one-bedroom house. It's for those reasons why Sadiq believes in implementing the policy, and in that respect, then I hear what you say, or as Voltaire would say, I disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. With that being said, I don't feel like that. I feel like Sadiq's policy represents more people and serves more people in that regard. And let me just be clear about another thing as well. The mayor he's not asking for powers to implement rent controls. That's the short version. When you actually look at the actual detail of the policy and see how it's going to be implemented, what we actually want is to create a private rented commission, and the way that private rented commission will actually be structured and the way it will operate is you'll have and bear in mind you'll get more detail on Sadiq's website, but in the actual commission itself, you'll have private renters that have some representation on that board, as well as developers and investors as well. So in that respect, then we'll be making policy using the art of compromise, using the art of the possible, and making sure that everyone is represented in that decision, and that everyone is okay, even if everybody isn't. So as I said, politics is really the art of compromise and the art of the possible, and it's about making sure that everyone's okay. And in that respect, we need to have a more balanced policy. We need to have balance of interests, and we need to make sure that people who are private renters, tenants, have more of a sway and a bigger slice of the cake and more representation and a bigger voice when it comes to the pricing of London properties. Because to be honest, the fact is, people like you and me, and people like some of the viewers watching at home, not all of us can afford £1,100 for a one bed, or £1,400 to £1,800 for a two bed. or up to 2,500 for a 3-bed. That's just, it's not a realistic expectation, and it's not fair as well that in some cases you can to even rent a single room in a 6-bed HMO property in London. It's going to cost you £950 per calendar month. Like, that is just ridiculous pricing, and most people can't afford that. And then in some cases, the standard and the stock of the housing isn't even good.
Yeah.
So Sadiq is absolutely right to actually want to tackle this issue, and it's not about where has the rental has this worked in other cities. Actually, just can you clarify what you mean by that? What's clarify the question on that?
So rent control, I mean, every it used to exist in the UK. It was a thing, and then it got abolished because it sucked and because it didn't work. It's a thing in New York. It's a thing in California. The two states with the highest rents and the most homeless people is where rent control is. They brought it in Scotland in 2017, 18, and have said that it's been a flop. The Scottish government said it was a flop. They brought it in Berlin last year, and as a result, Berlin have a massive housing shortage. So I just think, I get the idea. I understand that it's a shame that people are priced out of where they might have grown up because the rents have gone so high. But I think that, I believe in a free market. I think that any business, you have a willing seller and a willing buyer. I think that rent caps, my properties, the rents are already capped in all of my properties. And they're capped because people are only prepared to pay what it's worth. And it's about supply and demand. So I think if you say in London, actually we're gonna say, the rents are capped at this amount or this amount, or they have to go up in level of inflation or whatever, however it's done, what's going to happen is it's going to put off developers and investors going to that area. And at the moment there's a massive shortage of houses in London. So what they should be doing, in my opinion, is trying to encourage developers coming into London, not deter them by bringing in rent control. And whenever rent control is brought in, it deters developers. It deters investors. And it's not about trying to look after the tenant. I'm not saying, because I'm an investor and a developer, I'm going to think of it from the investor's I don't care about tenants. I'm actually thinking of it from the tenant's perspective. If you're a tenant, the way to make housing more affordable is to create more houses. But rent control, historically, every time it's ever happened in the world, historically, every time rent control's come into place, it's actually made a shortage of houses much worse, therefore distorted the market and created more homeless people, etc. So that's why I'm against it. I understand the concept, I understand the idea, and I think the problem is people, and educate me, enlighten me, help me out, but the way I see it is people just think, oh, that's expensive, that's not fair, it should be less. But they're not actually thinking about the long-term effects of rent control. And I think Sadiq probably knows the long-term effects. I think he's just saying, oh yeah, let's bring in rent control to get votes.
Respectfully, I disagree with that. And look, you mentioned that you believe in the free market.
Yeah.
Yes, the free market is good, but a free market that is also regulated is really important. So let's take, for example, while we're on the topic of housing, before the estate agent market wasn't regulated, and we had agents charging vendors on one end ridiculous fees, and also tenants on the other end. So then the policy was brought in to prevent agents from being able to charge or essentially make money on both ends and charge tenants ridiculous fees, and that is an example of where it's not a black and white answer. It's shades of grey. And that's an example where where a policy was implemented that actually represented and helped more people at scale. Because now we as tenants don't need to be paying those fees anymore, and agents don't need to be ripping off both sides. Obviously, I understand there's lots of good agents, and you work with good agents, and I work with good agents, but it's just about, the point is about regulating the market is important. So let me answer some of the points you made there about other cities. Well, firstly, the Labour Party learns, and we in politics, we learn from the examples of other cities, and it is true that rent caps are in principle new policy initiatives that are being launched in different cities. London is a world city, and what do we mean by world city is a city where you have um, great fields of human endeavor in technology, in art, in science, in culture,
Yeah.
in communications. Wherever you have advancement in human endeavor in in all of these different fields, or especially when you have all 5 fields in one, it's known as a world city. So, a fair comparison of London. London is what you would call a rank 1 world city. A fair comparison for London would be somewhere like New York,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't, for example, be somewhere like, I don't know, like Madrid, because that's a slightly lower tier in terms of world city. If you judge world cities from that perspective, which is what a lot of political scientists do.
Yeah.
So, in that respect, then we learn if rent caps as a principle are new, because we've never had such housing crises in London and in New York and in Singapore and in Hong Kong. We are learning from how those policies were firstly introduced and secondly implemented in those cities. So when you're making policy from that perspective, it's not just about, like, firstly, is the philosophy of implementing rental control a good one? Is it a good thing for us to want more people to have access to housing and fair priced housing, a base human needs? Well, yes, it is. I think you'd agree with that.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about what the policy is. Well, we can all agree that the aim of the policy is a good one.
Yeah.
But what it is also about is how it's actually implemented. So in that regard, then we've learned from how the good things that they did in New York,
Yeah.
and the things that they didn't do so well. We're not going to do that. Also, the actual policy making process is very different. So, do you know much about how we actually make? To what extent have you had an opportunity to do research on how the process that we go through to make a policy like that?
I know a fair bit about rent control. I wouldn't have done a video if I didn't know, about it.
Yeah.
So
that's fair enough. So it's a clear sort of policy process. So firstly, we would invite tenant representative organisations and landlord representative organisations to come and be a part of that policy making process.
Yeah.
Then we would draft that legislation with equal representation from both sides, and we as well, not we, because I'm not Sadiq, who's the mayor, and also the councils themselves. The politicians will sort of sit in the middle between the two sides and seek to form a compromise and a sort of, like I said, a good decision that balances out all the interests. Then there'll be then they'll reach a policy position, and that will go through a committee with different parties from different perspectives, depending on the council. And then there'll be a consultation with the public, where members of the public, so for example, if that was to happen in let's say Southwark Council, there'll be a public consultation where it'll be well advertised, and anyone from the public can come and take part in 2 or 3 meetings where we'll actually ask people what do they actually think about the policy, do they agree with it, and what they actually say and what people think. And bear in mind that it's our duty to actually represent members of the public and represent those people which we were elected to serve, and people who don't have a voice, people who are paying ridiculous rental fees. Then the views of the actual public and the views of residents and tenants will be taken into consideration, as well as landlords and developers like yourself, and tenants like yourself. I know you straddle both
I'm
sides.
a tenant, investor, developer.
Okay.
I think you say that it's a new thing though, rent control, but it's not a new thing, is it? It's been going on for decades.
Yes. So if it'd be okay, I'll just finish that last point there, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, fine.
So thank you. So even then, after that consultation is had, then we'll trial the policy. We'll trial it get the feedback,
Yeah.
and then amend and retrial it again, and in that organic way, the policy will policies like rental control, and in this case, it's not at the beginning. It's not that the mayor is going to implement that with a stamp.
What do you think? What do you think?
So why do you think so?
Yeah.
So do you think that's a good process
No.
to go through?
No. I think.
Why not?
Well, the process of bringing in laws might be a good process.
Yes.
But I think rent control is a bad philosophy that's never worked.
But the mayor's not asked. The mayor hasn't asked for the mayor hasn't asked for the policy to bring rent control. The mayor's asked for the power. The mayor, the office of the mayor, at the moment doesn't have the power to bring forth a private rental commission that represents all sides, that will discuss and bring that policy together. But those aren't the powers that the mayor's asked for.
Okay, Sadiq said that there's overwhelming arguments for rent control.
Yes.
What are they?
Overwhelming arguments for rent control. Okay, so the fact that in London most people are priced out of the rental market.
But how's rent control going to help that?
How's rent control going to help it? We believe that £1,100 for a one-bedroom property is completely ridiculous.
Right.
So it's 1,400, 1,800. So it's £2,500 for a 3-bed. Now, in other cities like New York, like Berlin, and like those others, it's true that they've been tested and they haven't been perfect when they've been implemented.
Well, they've devastated the housing market.
In your opinion, however, there are organisations who argue they've devastated them. There are organisations that argue that are in support of them. For example, the New Economics Foundation and Generation Rent in the UK is in favour of them, and they've also gone through a process of also analysing and looking at the data and actually going and speaking to tenants and landlords in New York, in Berlin,
but when the
the
Scottish government themselves say it was a flop, and you just got to look at the statistics, like in Berlin, the fact that they are 50% behind on their housing on their housing shortages in Berlin. They only brought it in a year ago. I mean, the stats in New York, there was a direct correlation, and economists have said that over 200,000 rental units became void and empty as a direct result of the rent control. I don't think anyone's arguing.
I question to the extent. I question the extent to which one that you can draw a direct causal link between rental control and the fact. Sorry, would it be okay if I just finish this one point?
Yeah, sure.
I question the extent to which you can say that rental control has caused 50% of a housing shortage. No, there's a 50% housing shortage. The reason there's a housing shortage in London is because quite frankly, the Department for Communities and Local Government and the central government, the Conservative Party that are in power, from our perspective, are in the pockets of big developers and have deliberately completely underfunded councils, so they don't have the ability to actually build housing in the way that we need. So therefore, I suppose the kind of core point that I'm making is I appreciate your perspective that you're not in favour of rental controls, but I don't think it's a fair statement to say that rental controls are the reason why housing shortages remain.
That's what the councils have said of the places that have brought it in.
No, the councils haven't said that. No, some councillors who may be Conservative councillors, who may be councillors, who may have taken, or maybe, shareholders or have stakes or reasons why they would be in favour or in line or aligned in terms of their positions with big developers have said that, and they are not representative of everyday Londoners. They're not representative of 8.4 million people. They're not representative of you or me. They're not representative of I go canvassing, and I knock doors and I man stores, and for most average Londoners, and I'm saying that as myself. I'm a tenant. I'm 27. I'm a tenant. I live in a HMO. I've been priced out of the private rented market. I can't just like everyday people, like normal people who can't afford to pay 1,100 for a one bed, or 1,400, between 1,400 and 1,800 for a two bed, or 1,800 to 2,500 for a three bed. It is, we believe, and I believe. So I'll speak in terms of me. I believe the duty of politicians, of elected officials who have been elected to serve their communities, serve our communities, to make sure that the interests of tenants, of good landlords, and even the landlords who we would like to see do better things, who maybe have they have the right goals, but maybe they don't quite know. They either have over systemized their businesses, or they don't know how to do things properly.
Yeah.
It's our duty to make sure that the interests are balanced, and, to be honest, weighted in the favour of the many, not the few. And that's why Sadiq has brought that's why Sadiq supports the policy. That's why the office of the mayor should have the powers. And Sadiq himself, who's a great candidate, by the way. I don't know how much you know about Sadiq, but Sadiq grew up in London. It's from Tooting. His dad was a bus driver. Sadiq has done some fantastic work. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer before he was MP of Tooting, and then he was MP of Tooting. Then he was mayor. When he was a performing lawyer, he represented a lot of ethnic minority communities and ethnic minority defendants and ethnic minority people who wanted to prosecute people who just employers, sometimes even government organisations and institutions who were in the best case ignorant, and in the worst case racist. Sadiq is a great candidate. He's made of good stuff. I believe in him. I believe in the party. I believe in Labour values. And just on this particular issue, when it comes to about housing, we believe in serving the interests of as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And offering the opportunity for everyday people to be able to actually afford to rent in London. And like I said, one in four people in London in the private rented sector. I'll just get that fact from there.
No,
the average rent for a one bed in home in London is more than a three bed nationally, and that can't be right, and that prices everyone out, and that's why I agree with it. And like I said, it's not that the mayor wants to just enforce rental controls like that on people. No, it's just that we want to have a proper process where everyone is represented in those decisions, and in the end, everyone's okay.
I understand. And I'm not here to say Sadiq's a bad guy. I'm not here to say that Labour Party are a terrible party. I'm talking about rent control.
Yes.
So, where has rent control? It's happened many times in many different parts of the world. Where and when has it ever brought about a positive change and actually achieved the objective, which is it's brought down the rents, it's helped the many? Where has it ever worked?
It worked to a large extent, or it is working.
Yeah.
So because firstly, it's not a bang and it's done. It's a process.
So where's it?
If I may, it's a process. So the process is working in New York. It's being, yes, it's true that when we first bring a new policy in, you don't always get it completely right the first time. You need to implement, you need to develop, you need to learn from your exam. You need to learn. Well, that's why in London, and bear in mind, can I just point out that regardless of what people think about trialing it in this city or that city, London's a very unique city. London, like I said, is a world city. It's a rank 1 world city. The only cities that can ever that are perhaps comparable with London are cities like New York, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and in this case, London's personality is also very unique in the sense that that it's the proud sort of capital of the UK, of England, that has a very specific history, that has a very specific demographic when it comes to you know, the black and Asian minority ethnic community, Jamaicans, Windrush, Bangladesh, etc. Other or London EU citizens as well. As Sadiq says, look, London is an open city. London has unique challenges and unique opportunities, and it is right that we seek to make sure that London is a city for everybody, and that everybody can enjoy it, and that London is an open city, that firstly everyone can at the beginning first afford to even live in, and then also have a great time and actually have a decent life, and that the cost of living is kept down reasonable. And first and foremost, what do you need? Housing, food, water, education, etc. And that's why housing is such a key policy nationally, but definitely in London, where London is several times more expensive than every other place in the UK and actually on earth. And that's why it's right to do so.
I love London, and I agree that we should have affordable housing. You say New York, out of all the places you feel it's worked the best. It's been going in New York now. Rent control was introduced, I think, about 50 years ago. It's been a long time. In the 60s and 70s, over 200,000 rental units became empty after they brought in rent control. How has it helped New York? Prices are higher than ever. There's more homeless people. So if that's the place that you pick as the best example, in what way has it been good for New York?
I didn't pick New York as the best example. I picked New York as an example.
Okay.
And also, just to be clear on that, and also the housing, the problem, the challenge of housing is a much more complicated problem than that has many different facets, including how much budget do councils actually have to actually build council housing, how much regulation is there, and how is that actually implemented, what are the unique challenges and opportunities within those cities, what's Lambeth like versus Southwark versus Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea. It's a very unique, each city and each borough has very unique challenges and very unique things that need to be dealt with and regulated. And it is absolutely right that the Labour Party or anyone who has the privilege to be elected to serve in a publicly held office should do their absolute best to make sure that everyone is represented and make sure that things are fair, and that's exactly what we're doing on housing, on education, and on other issues. But just to focus on housing, it's not about if the policy works. It's not about if the philosophy of the policy is correct, because we actually all agree that there should be affordable housing. It's about how it's implemented.
Correct.
And in terms of how it's implemented, we're going to go through a very, very thorough and a very fair process to make sure that all sides of the argument are represented. And in the end, the actual legislation that will come out, if Boris Johnson allows the office of the mayor to have this power, and if the Department for Communities and Local Government does it, the actual policy that will come out will be a good one. And guess what? It won't be perfect, but you know what? We'll amend and we'll learn and we'll keep growing and growing, just like a business does, just like your business does, just like my business does. You don't get it. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's no such thing as the perfect society, but there is the good society, and it's our duty. It's our duty, you and me as citizens, to participate in the political process, and it's the duty of politicians to do their best to serve. And that's exactly what Sadiq's doing, and I believe in Sadiq, and I back Sadiq 100% to be Mayor of London.
Why do you think that in 2016, when Sadiq was asked about rent control, he said, just because it's a popular idea doesn't mean that it's a good one?
Yeah, I can't comment on behalf of the Mayor. I'm not here to do that. What I can, and I'm not sure that I'm not entirely sure that quotation has been is entirely correct. I don't know if you ever heard him actually say that on video.
Yeah, I did.
But even if that was the case, we're now 4 years on or 5 years on now. We've had more of an opportunity to develop the policy and think about how it's been implemented. We've been able to learn from other cities, and like I said, it's not just as simple as rent controls or not. It's about how you do it. In politics, you have the aim, the method, the implementation, and then the learnings, and then you go back around and you do it again.
How do you think then it will be different to, because I don't think it's worked ever. I mean, when I asked you to name one place where it's worked about positive change, you know, you said New York, which I think it devastated. But if you're saying it could work if it was done in a different way,
Yeah.
which is fair enough, how are we gonna bring rent control in a different way? What's going to be different about how you would like to see it done in London than in the other places where it's failed?
Well, the fact that it will go through a process, the fact that it goes through that process, where people like yourself have an opportunity to be actually part of that discussion in the first place and give your view and help shape that policy, as well as tenant organisations like Generation Rent can go through that process. I believe in, it's not about how it's going to be different. I believe in the political process, I believe in the values, and I believe in what we're trying to achieve. And I know that you are very passionate about getting involved in politics and about, you know, your sense of civic duty, aren't you?
Yeah.
And in that respect, then, it is right for the office of the mayor to have that power to set up that commission. It's right for people like you and me to be able to participate, and it's right, and it's right that it goes through that process, and then we do come to a policy that works. And if it's not perfect, we'll just amend it and learn and keep going and growing and growing and growing, just like everything else.
Yeah.
So the short answer to your question, Samuel, is that it's not a simple yes or no answer. It's not a black and white answer. Politics is shades of grey.
Yeah.
And everything, like every single policy, like every other business, like every other, like everything in the world, is a learning process. And what it really counts on is, well, what values do you have first? Do you believe in the leader? Does that particular leader have the right values to implement a policy or to represent what I believe in and represent people? And in this case, yes, Sadiq does. I know he does.
I understand what you're saying, and it sounds to me you're a smart.
Is that fair?
Yeah,
is that fair?
I understand. Listen, you're a smart person, but it does sound a little bit like what you're saying is there's a problem. I really like Sadiq, and I'm sure it'll be okay, and let's just let him do. Like, rent control doesn't work. It's historically proven to not work.
Look, with respect, I don't agree with you in that sense, and I don't think that it's a simple question of if it works or not. It's about how it's implemented and what parts of it have worked and what parts of it haven't, and how. And I learned this from you. When something doesn't work, you don't just give up. You say, "How can I?" And you do it.
Agree.
And at the end of the day,
agree with that. But what I would argue in this instance is there is a problem, right, with people not being able to afford rents in London.
Yes.
There needs to be affordable housing. People need to be able to, you know, it's not good for people to be priced out of the market. I would agree with that. And I think that the solution to that is two things. Number one is I think that it's more houses. I think we need to have more houses. Number two is it would be good if wages went up, right? If people, because the house prices and rents are going up, but wages haven't really gone up much. That's a whole other conversation. But in terms of London, here's the thing, right? Right now, there's so many commercial properties in London that are empty, right? Because offices have moved out. There's massive opportunity right now in London for developers to go into London, to turn the commercial offices...
The right kind of developers with the right values.
Well...
Unfortunately, all the developers don't have the right aims.
Doesn't matter. Even if they're greedy, fat cat developers...
If they don't have the right fire safety standards?
Oh, yeah, but that's a separate issue.
It's not a separate issue. Housing itself is an entirely positive... Housing is an entire policy area and policy remit that we will address in the way that you're saying, in a multi-dimensional way. So it's about making more. So actually, Sadiq's policy isn't just about rental controls or private rental commission. Yeah, it's about hitting it from multiple points of view.
Which I probably agree with.
Right. So in that respect, it sounds like you do support Sadiq in a more holistic sense.
Probably. Probably not, but maybe.
Okay. Well, let me explain what I mean by that. I agree with you that we need some more housing. I agree with you that wages need to be higher. I agree with you that we need to look at commercial properties. I also agree with the fact that there should be a private rental commission that looks at that policy in a way that represents all the values.
Yeah.
And we're looking to do all of those things at once. And that is our housing policy agenda.
Right.
And I appreciate that you're focused on rental controls, but from the perspective of the Labour Party, we need to look at it in a much more holistic sense. And in that way, I actually think that we're coming to quite a common position here. And now I have a question for you. Actually,
go on.
So if the private rent, if the mayor does win, or not if, but when he wins,
Yeah, he probably will.
when he wins, and if Boris Johnson does take our mandate, the mandate of the mayor, who will win by millions, win in London, represent 8.4 million people in the Greater London area, and he gets those powers to create the private rental commission. And people like yourself are invited to participate in that policy making process. Will you show up?
Yeah.
All right. Well, in that case, then that's great, and let's do it. And
Yeah.
that is
No, let's not do it. Let's not do rent control.
No, I'm not saying let's do rental control. I'm saying let's all participate in politics and make sure.
Yeah.
And is that something that you agree with?
I agree with that, but can I just say
Perfect.
one point?
So thank you.
Let me say one point. Really, really, really important. I need to get this off my chest.
Please do.
If I may, right.
Please do.
If I may. So there's properties in London right now, commercial properties, where the offices have moved out because of the pandemic.
Yes.
And they're empty. And they're crying out, fix me up and turn me into a residential unit. If that happens, that's gonna bring the rents down, right?
Yeah.
Rents have dropped since Sadiq's been in power by 10% naturally. They've gone down. When developers go in and convert these commercial offices, which are empty at the moment, into residential apartments, what's happening is the rents are going to come down. I'm like, yes, it's great. We're on the same team. But if rent control comes in, all the developers are going to go, actually, I've changed my mind. And they're going to go and they're going to do it in Birmingham. We're going to have a bigger problem on our hands in London.
Okay. Well, firstly, when it comes to the commercial properties, just like with the private rental commission, we're going to do that slowly. If we were to do something like that, we do that slowly, we'll do that properly, we'll do it with a proper process, we'll have a proper consultation.
Yeah.
People like yourself will be involved if you want to participate. And yes, we want developers to do that, but they need to have the right values, and they need to bring in the right safeties, and they need to care about tenants. And I know you do, and I know I do, I know we do. So again, all I can really say is I'm going to send you the link for when all right, bro. We have those consultations, and I'd love to see you there.
All right, bro.
We'll participate together. And just on all of that, I just want to say I back Sadiq Khan for many reasons. I believe in him as a candidate. He shares the values. He comes from humble beginnings. Yeah. He understands the perspectives of those of us who weren't born with silver spoons, and that's why he's a great candidate. And I can't remember your candidate's name, but that's kind of the point.
I don't really have a candidate. Sean Bailey's Conservative Party.
Yeah.
But as I say, I'm not here to talk about Sadiq Khan.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's a lovely guy. I've never met him.
Yeah.
Right. I just don't think that rent control is the right way to bring down prices in London. I think that it's a flawed philosophy that doesn't work. However, I think we can both agree that it's important that we discuss these issues.
Yeah. At the right meeting where decisions are made, because decisions are made by people who show up, and there's a meeting and there's a proper meeting where you'll be able to participate in that process.
Okay.
And trust me, you can have a great influence on the actual policy and what actually happens.
Yeah.
And by the way, you said it's not really about Sadiq, it's about rent. No, it is about Sadiq, because your business is called Property Investors with Samuel Leeds.
Yeah.
Meaning it's your brand, it's whether or not people believe in you. And that first they believe in you as Samuel Leeds because you are a role model and an example of someone who if I may, based on your book, who came from a sort of a normal background and was able to build himself up.
Yeah.
Well, Sadiq is no different to you in that regard. He just chose to get involved in politics and chose to serve, and he's serving in a different way. And now let's all serve together and let's all get involved and let's do some great stuff.
All right, thanks, Hakeem, for coming out. What do you think? Is rent control a good idea, or is it actually going to hurt the people it's supposed to help? Is Sadiq right? Am I right? What do you think? Comment below in the comment box, and appreciate you coming out once again. Thank you, brother.
All right.